What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Electorate Podcast. I am your host, Ian West. Today, I'm going to start with a little bit of an audible on how I was going to approach this. I ended up posting a clip to social media yesterday that generated quite a bit of commentary, quite a bit of back and forth between both sides of the aisle, really. And it was interesting because they both sort of disagreed with my take, but from very different viewpoints. And I kind of wanted to dissect that a little bit before we really got started. So what I posted yesterday was primarily about Democrats and the messaging. And it was a little clip about how, Democrats are not speaking well to the middle class voter. And they really need to stop just talking to other liberals and instead find a way to speak to the middle class electorate, find a way to speak to them in terms that they can understand, terms that they can agree with, terms that feel like they're not just talking down to them and instead understand them and exactly where they're coming from. That generated a certain number of people on the left being a little bit critical of that mindset, and basically just coming out and saying, well, the Trump voters only voted that way because they're dumb. They don't understand. We don't need to change our messaging. We don't need to do anything else. It's not our fault that they can't understand it. It's not our fault that we have a really good economy right now, and Democrats just weren't able to get them, be able to convince them of that. And I kind of just wanted to start by saying that is a very dangerous way of approaching this. And it almost feels like, these are just commenters on social media. These are obviously not Democrat strategists. These are obviously not people involved with campaigns or top level advisors or anything like that. But if that mentality tends to pervade up into those higher end points, I think we might have another scenario like we did in this election going into 2026, where we haven't changed anything, we haven't learned, we insist upon everybody coming to our terms and meeting us where we are, instead of saying, okay, why did our messaging fail? And it's not just because all the working class, independent, undecided voters there at the end of the election were dumb. It is because of something we did, something that we failed to do. And I kind of wanted to point that out. I kind of wanted to bring that up because, this is a very important lesson that we have to learn. And we cannot just brute force these messages. We cannot brute force voters into understanding or believing us or our message getting across to them. We spent a lot of time, particularly the Biden administration, spent a lot of time telling voters that the economy was great. They spent a lot of time telling them, look at all this I did. Look at how I fixed this. Everything is getting better. Everything is improving. And the average voter was just like, no, man, it's not getting better for me. My prices are still high. I'm able to save less per check than I used to be able to. And you're not going to convince that person that the economy is good just because you say it is, or just because the data that you have states that it is. And yes, we do have a lot of data that states that the economy is good. It's improving. The steps that have been taken are making it better. But at the same time, those people know their lived experiences, and you are not going to convince them that their lived experiences are incorrect or that they are not the reality, especially when they go talk to other people and the constant conversation is, well, everything's more expensive now. Everything's more expensive now. Houses, groceries, cars, everything across the board is more expensive now. And that is the crux of the position. We cannot just be going and telling them, you are wrong, the economy's fine, when their lived experiences say otherwise. So I kind of just wanted to start there with that point and sort of clarify that. I don't think we need to belabor that point. I think that is a lesson that is being learned. But it is something that I think we need to come to terms with, and people need to really get on board with that going forward. So, how I really wanted to start today's show is sort of a rehash of sort of the social media and the influencer and the podcast and the ever-changing landscape of the media climate surrounding politics. So we talked about last time that there is a subset of the population out there, a significant, sizable subset of the population out there that gets their news from TikTok, Instagram, podcast, all these short form content generators that lead to longer form. So they see, may not listen to a whole Joe Rogan podcast, but they get the clip, they get the moments, and that might eventually lead them to going and seeking out the whole episode. But most of what generates that is seeing these short clips. And, we kind of talk about how Democrats need that same sort of ecosystem of podcasts and TikTok and the influencer network, Twitch streaming, all that stuff. And it's really hard to sort of formulate that without sort of coming across as contrived, right? Without sort of coming across as like, well, you just made this for this purpose. The Joe Rogan podcast has now kind of turned a corner and become more conservative than I think it used to be. And I can sit here for a while and be critical of that. And I can say, Joe Rogan eventually just kind of sold himself to the highest bidder. And now that Trump came on his podcast and Elon Musk is backing Trump and all this, Joe Rogan is now, posting all this very, very pro-conservative stuff. He posted the Joe Rogan podcast Twitter account posted a map showing states with voter ID and how they voted, showing that, well, if you don't require voter ID in your state, then you're a blue state. Obviously making the point that Republicans have made in the past that Democrats want no voter ID laws because they want undocumented illegal people to vote, or just creating some sort of fraudulent voting activity in those states. So he has gone from someone who was pro-Obama, somebody who was a big Bernie bro, somebody who had a lot of more liberal viewpoints, to now being a conservative who's borderline sharing conservative conspiracy theories on his official channels. So, it's hard to find somebody in the space that I think, you could go after and say, okay, well, I want them to be that for us going forward. I've seen Mark Cuban's name thrown around a few times. Is he a guy that could kind of take up that mantle and be that for Democrats? Yeah, I mean, I think he could. He was a good surrogate during this election for Kamala Harris, and speaking to the way that Donald Trump, the things that were wrong with Donald Trump, the things that he was going to do incorrectly. He really, really did a good job of pointing out the issues with tariffs. I don't think it did a good enough job just because there simply wasn't enough time. The campaign was shortened. It was kind of just everything was go, 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 go. And he did a good job of being a surrogate for that and going on all these different shows. And I have no doubt that he is somebody who could hold his own going into an environment like Theo Vaughn, or going into an environment like Joe Rogan, and really being able to talk to them and give them what they're able to give him. I think he could also be somebody who could, have a forum like this, have a forum like Joe Rogan's podcast, and talk about issues, because he's not a hardline Democrat, right? He's got very Republican viewpoints in a lot of different things, but maybe that's what Democrats need right now. They need somebody more towards the middle. They need somebody who's very good in these environments and who's very eloquent and can speak concisely and clearly and get those points across. But I think it really comes down to, part of the reason what Kamala Harris did at the end there wasn't effective is because it seemed like it was all just crammed in right there at the end, right? It seemed, and it was, we obviously had a shortened campaign. It was extremely truncated. There was not much time to do anything. If you want to be successful in this environment, in my opinion, you're going to have to start doing these things early. Democrats are going to have to be appearing on Twitch streams and podcasts and Instagram and anywhere where these sort of more modern media outlets are occurring. Democrats need to be there year round. There's no, okay, well, it's election season for the next 4 or 5 months. Let's do it then. No, we need to be appearing on these constantly all year. People need to see us every day. It has to be some sort of content out there that exists every day. It's always election season. Right now, it's election season for 2026. We are preparing for the midterms. Everything that the Democrats are doing right now to fix their messaging, everything that Democrats are doing right now to figure out how the party moves forward from this loss. It's always election season, so we need to treat it like that. And I'm not saying, we got to pick a candidate today for president of the United States and have him start appearing on podcasts for the next 4 years. That's not what I mean. But we have to have the superstars of the party, the Pete Buttigieg, the Gretchen Whitmers, the AOCs. Like, they need to be, and they do a pretty good job of it, but I think they need to be appearing on these non-traditional outlets more often. And if we get too bogged down in feeling like we can't appear on a podcast or on a Twitch stream or anything like that, if we don't 100% agree with what that individual says or all their viewpoints, we're going to find that there's no outlets left for us. Okay. We have to approach this with a bit of an open mind. And yes, I'm not saying that, Joe Rogan is totally off the table or anything, but if he keeps going kind of in the direction that he is and keeps kind of going in this sort of conspiratorial, and we saw it before with the way he talked about RFK. RFK was the only guy that made sense to him. RFK is he's an out there guy. He's got some very, very controversial viewpoints, and he's about to be put in a position where he could be in charge of a lot of Americans' health, and he's not a doctor. It's, we have to be able to be delicate about it and go meet these podcasts where they are, go meet these influencers where they are, and really challenge them back and put them in a position where we say, okay, we want to speak to the people that listen to you, even if we don't 100% agree with what you said or what you've done or anything like that. We've got to do a better job of preparing ourselves for the blowback that we're going to get in an election year from the other side. And the best way to do that is start the process early and really get the ball rolling with these podcasts and get our ideas out there and make sure everybody's on message. You want to be able to riff, you want to be able to be likable and be, like another person out there, just a guy or a girl that you're having a conversation with, but you've got to be on message. Everybody's got to be speaking to sort of the same ideas, the same ideals and beliefs that we have to really get that message to stick over the next 2 years and then the following 2 years into a presidential election. So today we learned that Stephen Miller is to be named the White House Deputy Chief of Staff on Policy. I don't know that this is super unexpected. I think this is something that we knew Stephen Miller was going to have a pretty big part of the Trump administration. He's been a top advisor for a long time. He's been there all through Trump's reign as the GOP talisman. So I don't think we expected him to not have a big role. It is important because Stephen Miller he's a hardliner on immigration, right? He wants to reform. He wants to do mass deportations. He wants to denaturalize citizens. He wants to send them back to where they came from, and he wants to very much limit legal immigration. He wants to reform our immigration system to where it is extremely difficult. It is almost process prohibitive to do it. He is a hardliner. He is a white supremacist. He's got very, very extreme viewpoints. This is information that just came out a few hours ago. This is something that we'll definitely dive into on later episodes, but I kind of wanted to, throw that out there and make it known that, there was a certain subset of the voter population that, voted for Donald Trump despite his claims of mass deportation and despite his allies' claims of mass deportation as something that they were interested in doing. And, a lot of the mentality was, well, I didn't think he would do that. He says it, but I don't think he really means that. I don't think he's going to do that. This appointment suggests to me that they really intend to push that forward. They really intend to make mass deportations a real thing that they want to do. They want to reform immigration. What that means, I don't think we know yet. I'm sure we'll get some clarification as the months progress, but I would imagine it will be extremely restrictive. But most importantly, we saw last time that Trump was in office the separation of families at the border, and I think, unfortunately, we're going to see more of that. If you're talking about denaturalization of citizens, I think you're going to end up seeing a lot more of the separation of families as we send them, quote unquote, back to where they came from. So that's a point that we need to be aware of, watch it, understand it, and hopefully the voters who voted for Trump, despite him telling them, Latino voters, despite him, making it clear that mass deportation was something that he was interested, thinking he wasn't going to do it, look at this and say, okay, we made a mistake here. We should not have done this. So, we'll keep an eye on Stephen Miller. We'll keep an eye on what his plans are and see if we can get some clarification, see if any information leaks out in the coming months before the inauguration that would suggest what Stephen Miller's plans are, particularly for immigration right off the bat. So it's interesting that we kind of talk about this, and I've talked about it with a couple people I'm in a group chat on, and what do we think happens with the MAGA movement as we, start reaching the end of Donald Trump's final term as president of the United States? So we have seen almost across the board that MAGA wannabes are not successful. If it's not Donald Trump, they do not have the same pull. They do not have the same charisma, or they do not have the same, level of devotion or obsession that comes with a, kind of a cult of personality. So what is the Republican plan? Is their plan to sort of abandon MAGA? Is their plan to kind of go with what's more of a, a halfway between MAGA and traditional Republicans? And that's kind of J.D. Vance. He has those extreme viewpoints. He obviously, espouses the same bullshit Donald Trump does about eating the cats and dogs and the Haitian migrants in Springfield. And he does a very poor job at that, in my opinion. But he does it, but he also does it from the standpoint of a politician. He looks like a politician. He talks like a politician. He feels like a politician. He's not somebody that's going to do a campaign rally for 2.5 hours where he just starts with 2 sentences about what's on message or what they intended to talk about and then riffs for 2 hours. He's not good at that. He knows it. The times that he tried to do that, he failed miserably. So he's going to be a guy that stays on message. He's going to be your typical politician that goes out there, has his talking points, reads them essentially like bullet points or like he's reading off a PowerPoint presentation. And then, the rally's over and he moves on to the next one. And it's, rinse and repeat. He does that over and over in every city and every state that he goes to. Is that what MAGA is going to become? Because outside of that, you've got some lower level candidates, like we saw Mark Robinson in particular in North Carolina, and his history is just so ridiculous that I don't really think he has a genuine opportunity, though I do think he plans on running for Senate. I think he'll primary Tom Tillis in 2026, but that remains to be seen. But who can take up that talisman role that Donald Trump held, right? Is there anybody in the Republican Party that can capture that, that ability to almost be able to say nothing wrong or do nothing wrong and still have, sizable vote share, still have the base come out, be able to basically go out there, give no policy whatsoever, and still have people believe that he has their best interest at heart, or that he's going to be better on the economy, or whatever issue is most important in 2 to 4 years. It's hard for me to say. And part of the strategy that Democrats have to craft is not just what they want to do on the offensive, but what they plan to do on the defensive. And it's going to be difficult for them to sort of be able to anticipate that, because we don't know which direction the GOP is going to go after Donald Trump is out of office, right? We don't we don't know. Like, what do we expect here? Traditional GOP, MAGA GOP, some hybrid of the two? And if so, what does that person look like? Does it look more like Josh Hawley, or does it look more like JD Vance? And, I think obviously crafting our offense is important, changing our media strategy important, changing our messaging is important, but also monitoring what goes on, what sort of candidates are they going to put forth for the midterms, Senate elections, and seeing, okay, are they going hardline MAGA, or are they kind of reverting back? So that will be an interesting sort of topic of conversation as we approach the next 2 years, to see what is going to become of the Republican Party. And another factor is, like, does Donald Trump and co even care? Or do they give a shit? This is the end of the line for them. Do they have any sort of political expediency in order to try to maintain MAGA or maintain the Republican movement at all, or do they just go all out, all in, this is the end for me, so fuck it, I'm going to do whatever I want? And, that sort of internecine approach to politics that Trump has already had safeguards off, is he all in? So we'll kind of see how that plays out. We'll see how that goes in the next couple of years, and that'll give us some clarification on what to expect going into, the 2028 presidential election. Obviously JD Vance will be in position to possibly be the nominee, but by that point, do you think that we'll have sort of that, that incumbency bias, and would it be beneficial for Republicans to go with somebody else instead of the incumbent? And that'll be fascinating. That'll be something that we'll have to watch over the next couple of years. So AOC on Instagram did a posted a question, I think, on her story, in which she was like, people who support both Trump and me, or, voted for a Trump and a Democrat, tell me why. And got a bunch of replies. AOC posted quite a few of them on there, on her story that you could read. And it honestly, I got sent the article by somebody in one of my group chats on Twitter, and they were, kind of like baffled by it, and reading it. When I looked at it, I was like, okay, this logically makes sense, right? This feels like what I would have expected the answer to be. And it ultimately boiled down to Donald Trump and AOC to some degree. That maybe surprised me a little bit, but Donald Trump and AOC feel like non-traditional politicians. They don't feel like the establishment, right? They feel like they're real people. AOC does a very good job of appearing on social media, particularly Instagram stories or Instagram Live, and kind of just talking to people and making mistakes and being vulnerable and putting herself, out there as a person. And when you look at what she does, you feel like you're listening to somebody that you feel like you're listening to somebody who, you could easily just have a conversation with. And even if you disagree with them, you could have that conversation and everything would still be fine. Donald Trump does have a little bit of that when he goes on podcasts, when he goes on some of these news stories and he's talking to people. He talks just like a guy in a bar would, like just a dude in a bar sitting down having beers with you. Yes, he says some incredibly dumb things. Yes, he says some incredibly offensive, incredibly racist, all that stuff for sure. But he doesn't feel like a politician when he's talking. In fact, he feels like exactly the opposite of that. He feels like somebody who's railing against established politicians. He is a guy that's just willing to say whatever comes to his mind. A lot of people appreciate that. A lot of people respect it. But you can see how they're both viewed as anti-establishment from sort of different ends of the spectrum and different and sort of different approaches on how they do things, but ultimately winding up with the same sort of opinion that people have in them. Another big thing was, like we've talked about a bunch of times, the economy. And that's the big thing. People felt like Kamala Harris didn't speak to the middle class or working class voter. People felt like she didn't have a clear plan for the economy. And, she wasn't able to communicate what little bit of a plan that she did have. They didn't like the opportunity economy. I mean, that sounds like such a means-tested liberal message that people just did not they did not respond to it as well as I think they had hoped. It all basically came down to that. One of the answers was voted Trump, but I like you and Bernie. I don't trust either party establishment politicians. Another comment was, I feel like Trump and you are both real. You got one person here who's like, will you please share what you learn? I'm baffled by the split votes and AOC, comments on that. And it's, you can see what people, voted for, why they did it. And you can also still at the same time have this sort of reaction, but like, don't you understand? And I, that doesn't matter. That's not really the way that we should be looking at this, obviously, because we need to meet these voters where they are. We need to do a better job. How did we fail? Why did we fail? How do we get better? How do I get you back on my side? What does a real candidate look like to you? Is it somebody who can sit down and just have a conversation? Is it somebody who looks the part more than anything else? And, that's the conversation that we've got to have. And that's what we've got to come up with, because there's obviously, if you had told me a couple of years ago that there would be a sizable subset of AOC's district that voted for her and voted for Trump, I probably would have laughed. I would have thought that was absolutely impossible and absolutely ridiculous. Now that I see their responses and their reasoning behind it, I don't agree with it. And I have a difficult time sympathizing with it. But it gives you some insight and some understanding. And that's exactly what we need as a party is that insight and understanding and the ability to dissect these people and say, how do we bring them back? If they are already predisposed to voting for AOC, how do we get them back? What candidate do we put forward that is going to recapture that sort of that voter? Is it somebody younger? Is it somebody willing to do what AOC is willing to do on social media and just sort of sit down in her house or in her kitchen and chat with you while she's cooking on policy and things like that. So, that's something that we'll have to look at, and that's something that we'll have to sort of make sure that we understand going into the next one, because we can't just keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So, it was interesting to see the answers, not incredibly surprising, the answers that we got when you consider that they did vote for AOC and they did vote for Trump, but it definitely opened some eyes and gave us some good data and some good conversation to have. And finally, I had a conversation with a group chat that I'm in, and my question that I posited was, okay, what's y'all's opinion of ranked choice voting? And I got a little bit of mixed results on that. I got some people that really loved it, some people who were not a huge fan of it. Obviously there's some pros and cons, but the general consensus was that ranked choice voting kind of it's losing its steam a little bit. And that I think I agree that's true. So just starting out, ranked choice voting, what is it? Okay. Well, ranked choice voting is exactly what it sounds like. It is the method by which voters go into the poll and they vote for, say there's five candidates for president. They rank each one of those candidates 1 through 5 by highest preference to lowest preference. Okay. And then everybody's, all the way in between. And from there, the candidate who wins must get the majority, the 50+1 rule. And if they don't get a majority, here's what happens. The candidate who got the fewest number of first place votes, that is thrown out. And their second choice from that point gets given the first place vote, right? And from there, we see, okay, first round of getting rid of a candidate, do we have a majority now? If we still don't, same thing happens again. And that process happens all the way until one of the candidates gets 50+1 rule. So majority of the vote. And what this does is it basically tries to kind of nerf the spoiler vote, right? The Jill Steins of the presidential ballot, and really make those votes not sort of be the deciding factor behind it. So there are pros and cons to it. Some people say one of the pros is it leads to a more civil approach to campaigning, maybe down ballot. That might be true presidential election. I'm not sure. But the idea behind it is second place is not really a bad place to be a lot of times. So if you're in first in a lot of ballots, and you can get second or third in a lot, and you've got somebody like Trump who's guaranteed to get first and last in many, many, many ballots, you might be able to sort of work your way back up to that spot. But in my personal opinion, what you're going to have is sort of the same thing that you've got right now with voting. Democrats are going to put the Democrat first and the Republican last. Same with the base. Now, do you have, is there a sizable portion of the undecided voter who is like, well, I don't like Trump, but I don't hate Kamala Harris, I'll put her second, or vice versa. Or, I'm going to vote for Jill Stein because I don't agree with this policy of Donald Trump's, but I don't find Kamala so abhorrent, so I'm going to put her second. I don't know. That might be something that occurs. But for me, I do kind of like the system. I understand the pros and cons of it. I think it's something that it's worth talking about, but I'm not sure I see that as kind of a solution for the higher elections, the higher offices. So right now, ranked choice voting has been adopted, I think, in 62 jurisdictions. There's some pretty major ones. San Francisco has it. I think Minneapolis, Minnesota, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I think Alaska has, and there's a couple other. There might be some in New York City. I'd have to look into that a little more closely. But it was an interesting idea and an interesting system, and I think it could have a lot of benefits. Obviously, it makes the election process a little more complicated. You've got to go through several rounds of eliminating, presumably several rounds of eliminating ballots until you get a result. And another con is, could you argue that, the will of the people is not necessarily being done with ranked choice voting, and it kind of gets rid of the one person, one vote rule, because you vote 5 times, and you have to really sort of think about the whole thing. And are voters even capable of doing that? We have a hard enough time getting a lot of undecided voters to make a decision between 2 candidates. So, asking them to make that maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 candidates, like what do we expect them to just rank, the Republican and the Democrat, and then everybody follows suit, or rank, the Republican top and the Democrat very bottom, and then just randomly fill in the middle? Is it going to sort of solve any issues, or is it something that, we think is just going to create more confusion or make voting more difficult? Would it cause people to stay home because it becomes more complicated? And I just wanted to know about 2 candidates. Now you expect me to know about all these? Is it something that is worth exploring? Yeah, I think so. We've seen some success with it in a lot of places, but that's definitely a conversation that I think we'll keep having on this show as we kind of get more and more results from municipal and local elections, and sort of see, okay, this works, or here's an instance where it failed, and if you apply this on a grander scale, does it fail miserably? So something to keep an eye on, something to continue talking about. So that is the end of episode 2. Wrap this one up pretty quick. Originally I was going to do these mostly weekly. Right now there's kind of a lot going on, a lot of dynamic stuff happening, and I think maybe we could bang maybe 2 of these out a week. Hopefully have some guests on before too long. But I just want to say thank you for those who watch. Thank you for those who listen. You can get the Electorate on most places you find podcasts right now: YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We've got ours on Instagram, TikTok. We'll try to build everything out and get this on everything, including our own website here soon. But just want to say thank you for those who listen. Thank you to those who watch, and we'll check you out on the next one. See you later.